God is insecure.
Human beings instinctively understand that that which is preeminent ought to be recognized. This argument is like saying Michael Phelps is insecure because he won 23 gold medals.
And by insecure, I don't mean weak. I mean needing validation, control, and protection from doubt. And throughout the Bible, we see exactly that.
Of course, he's not going to show a scripture that shows God being in need or needing assurance from doubt. He's just going to twist how to interpret God's action in scripture, but not give an actual proof text.
First and foremost, God demands worship from us.
Yes, because the only thing that is infinitely worthy of all of our pursuit is God. That is morally virtuous. You're going to worship something, and if you worship anything other than God, it is disproportionate to that thing's value. God is morally just in requiring it.
Not as a byproduct of goodness.
No, because to make it a byproduct of goodness would make God second to some foreign standard of goodness. The pursuit of God is not a byproduct of goodness. It is the essence of goodness.
But as a requirement.
Yes, in a world in which all things can be traced back to God as their creator, the only true standard of goodness must begin with recognizing that basic axiom. This is why Revelation 4 verse 11 says, "Worthy are you, our God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they existed and were created." Thus, you cannot truly comprehend a thing rightly unless you understand its relation to that which created everything.
Belief, praise, and submission are treated as moral obligations.
Ironically, this is exactly what your criticism is doing in the inverse. It's suggesting that this is an overreaction from God because you believe there are other imperatives, there are other moral oughts that should exist, and you see this worldview as in violation of your moral ends. You're actually doing the very thing you're criticizing God for. You're just not in control like he is.
And choosing not to means eternal torment. That's like holding a gun to someone and telling them that they're free to decide whether or not to give them your wallet.
Why aren't you at the courthouses making this same argument, lecturing judges for giving out sentences to those who commit moral wrongs and then putting them in prison?
Technically, yeah, there's a choice, but only if you ignore the threat.
A threat is not inherently without virtue. If there is a true wrong, then a threat is righteous. And in this case, because God is infinitely righteous, to turn away from his infinite worth, to try to replace him, to reject his authority, is to commit a wrong of infinite damnation.
Also, if God already knows everything, why does it test people?
This is the God didn't do it my way fallacy. Just because you do not understand God's purposes does not mean it is illogical on God's part. It means that you are assuming you are in the position of God to understand what he ought to do.
God knew Abraham's faith, yet still demanded he proves it by almost killing his son. God destroyed Job's life just to see if he would keep worshiping. For the God Christians describe, constant reassurance and loyalty checks shouldn't exist.
That's one reading of it, but the fact is God has already revealed the next 430 years in the book of Genesis, starting in Genesis 15, and he also says that it's on the third day that this ram was provided. This was not some sort of loyalty check to see what Abraham would do, but instead it's setting up a typological pattern, which is why God's deliverances always come on the third day, which sounds an awful like the resurrection, which takes place on the third day. In other words, this is a historical event functioning as a foreshadowing of what God intended to do many, many years later. And thus, this is not some display of ignorance on God's part. It's actually a demonstration that just as he provided a ram, he intended to send his son into the world to function as a lamb who would die in the place of his people. And that's exactly what happened.